With MongoDB, I have to issue an apology to the IT department because we said MongoDB wasn't here. It is. It's actually on the lab computers. I'll show you where to find it. If you go to Program Files, you will see a MongoDB folder. And it's self-contained, so it's inside Server 3.0 bin. These are all of the executable files. We really only need a couple of them. So we can actually run MongoDB from here. What I'm going to do is copy all these files to another directory so that I don't have to browse all the way in here through the command prompt. So if you go to C Program Files MongoDB and then keep opening till you get to Server 3.0 in bin, what I'm going to do is hit Control A to select everything, and then I'll hit Control C to copy all these. I'm going to run these from inside of a subfolder in Node. We can run them from here if we want. It's probably easier if we dump them in with the rest of our Node stuff. So just copy all these files. And then I'm going to go back to my users, R. Freeman, Node directory. And what I suggest you do is make a new directory called MongoDB and just paste all these files. We'll run them from here. So yours should look exactly like my path. The only difference is in the users. It will have either your laptop username or it will have on a lab computer, it'll say GC student. Okay. So make a user folder in your users. In your Node folder, just make a MongoDB folder. Paste those files in. So I've made a MongoDB directory. I'm going to make one other directory. The reason is MongoDB, as a default, expects that our database files will get created in a folder called data. So once I've got my MongoDB files, I'm just going to go back to my Node folder, and I'm going to create an empty directory called data. Once we start running MongoDB, any databases we create or work with will get copied in there. Thanks for all your help, buddy. So create the MongoDB folder, paste in all the Mongo files, and then just create a directory called data. That's blank. You don't have to put anything in there. So now we're going to need two command prompts. We're going to need one command prompt to start our local MongoDB server. But once we start the server, that command prompt is locked. We can't issue other commands. If we issue other commands, we stop the server. So we want to keep that server running. Then we'll open a second command prompt, and we'll try some Mongo commands from the command line. So I'm going to open a command prompt, and I'll go into my Node MongoDB folder. If I do a dir, we see all of the files that we copied from the program files directory. So we need to run two different executables here. The executable that actually starts the local MongoDB server is this one here. It's called MongoD. So if I run the command MongoD, we also need to tell it where is the path to the data directory. So we'll add --db path is C users, your username on your machine, Node, and data. So this command will start the MongoDB server, and it will look in here as the path where the databases are saved. So your command should be identical to mine. Obviously, you'll replace this with the username either of your laptop or GC student from your lab machine. So once I run this, you may get prompted by the Windows firewall. The firewall may block it and ask you if you want to allow access. If so, say yes.
What was the first thing again?
Well, all I did was go into my...
Oh, okay.
MongoDB directory.
All right.
So I can run the MongoD executable that I copied in there. So when I hit enter, it says, command prompt says, MongoDB is starting on the default port 27017. So that's a default. We can change that if we want. That's typically where MongoDB will run. Okay. And the last message says, hey, I'm waiting for connections. So we want to leave this command prompt running because if we stop it, the server is killed. So once that's running, I'm going to open up a second command prompt. I'm going to go back into my MongoDB directory again. So I'll change directories and go into node MongoDB. And to run Mongo commands at the command line, we just type Mongo. You'll notice so here was MongoD. That starts the server. And the mongo.exe, right above it, that allows us to run SQL-like commands from the command line. So I'll just type Mongo. Tells us what version we're in. It automatically creates a database called test for us. If we want to create a different database name, we can, or we can just work with the test database. And as soon as we do that, if you notice, now I'll go into my node data directory, and yours should now look similar to mine. Here's the test database. You can open up those files. All you'll see are ones and zeros. It's just, remember the format's BISON. It's binary JSON. So if I open one of these files, you can expect to see yeah, I'll use Sublime can handle it.
You'll use it with Notepad. It'll take 7 years worth of.
So if I open up my file, here's the database. It's binary.
What was the command to create the? Oh, just.
We don't, but there's one called test. If we wanted to create a different database, so if we want to create a different database, we can just simply type use. Let's type use COMP2068. I'll put in PM. And it switched to that database. I don't have one yet, but as soon as we do something in here, we're going to see a COMP2068 PM set of files.
I noticed Sublime translated the binary into hex there. There was F's.
Yeah, it does. Okay. Now, there's also instructions in the documentation if you want to run MongoDB as a Windows service, you can do that. There's instructions in the docs if you want to do that. We'll just start it manually when we need it from the command prompt. Okay. So let's try some CRUD operations. So rather than using our test database, we'll use our new one called COMP2068, or mine is COMP2068-PM. So one of the cool things we can do, remember MongoDB is schemaless. If we can actually insert some data without even having an existing collection, and that collection will just get built on the fly. So let's we'll create a collection called players. And in there we're going to insert. So we'll put in a bracket. And now we can pass in a JSON object. You can put in any names you like, doesn't matter. So the whole thing is in round brackets. I know it's a little hard to see, and then I have curly braces around my object. Whoops, I need to do one thing, which is because these values are strings, they need to be in double quotes.
Is that a comma between?
Yes, and it is a comma separating. So we don't have a players collection. MongoDB will create one on the fly. So if I hit enter, tells me one result was inserted. If I want to see what's in there, I can type db.players.find with no parameters, find everything. And here's what got created. It created one record with the values I specified, and MongoDB automatically gave it an ID and assigned a unique identifier. So that's neat. We can insert data into a collection that doesn't even exist. It'll just get built on the fly. Now let's insert a second document, but this time we'll use a different schema. So db.players.insert. We'll still put in a first name. We'll put in a last name. I'm also going to put in a number. So we're supplying the same two keys as before, first and last name, but now we're supplying a third key. If this was a MySQL database, what would happen when we tried to run that second insert?
Would it get angry that there's a third column?
Yeah, if our table didn't have a column called number, we'd get an error saying there is no column called index called number, and our insert would fail. Mongo doesn't care. One result. Let's check again. So now we'll find. Now we've got two documents, and their schema is in part similar but part different. MongoDB doesn't care. If we want to format our result a little bit cleaner, we can type db.players.find. If I add the .pretty function at the end, it lays it out this way, where it breaks each key value pair onto a new line, which makes our data easier to read.
Does this have an equivalent to drop tables?
Absolutely. You can drop. Yep, there's a drop command. So we can do updates. So let's say, I'm not sure what will happen. Let's say we want to now add a number to our first record. So we'll type db.players.update. So where first name is Jose, this basically functions as our where clause. What are we updating? We then use $set. Whoops, actually, hang on a sec. With a colon. And then two end curly braces. I may have to play with the syntax a little bit. So find a record with the first name Jose, and now set the number value as 19. We'll see what happens. I think I got my brackets a little bit messed up. I think I might just have one extra bracket. About update, notice it's got this flag here that says multi-true. by default, when you run an update in Mongo, it only updates one document, the first instance that it finds. So if you want an update to affect multiple documents, you need to add this multi-true option. Otherwise, it will only do a single update. And the delete option is simply remove. We won't do a delete option. So DB, the name of our collection, remove and any condition. If we want to remove only a certain number, then our remove also has a parameter. If we just want to delete the first instance, that remove function has an optional parameter where you can pass in how many records to delete that meet that criteria. Now, we're not really going to use the command line again for issuing our Mongo commands. We really want to run this stuff from our Node application. So what we want to do is we're going to insert some other records into a different table, and then we're going to get our build an Express application and get it to connect and talk to our database. Okay. So to do that, if you go on Blackboard, I've given you a sample quick script here. We're going to do a CRUD module over the next couple weeks where we're going to use an articles collection. We're going to start off by putting 3 articles in here through the command line. And then we'll build out the pages in our Express application so we can do create, read, update, and delete through our Node application. So if you go on Blackboard and copy those 3 lines, and just paste them in at your command prompt, it should create 3 articles. If we want to check, we can run the command db.articles.find pretty. And here are the 3 articles. The titles are our first article, here's number 2, and day 3, article 3. So each article has a date created, a title, content, and Mongo automatically assigns unique IDs to each one. So just paste that script from Blackboard and run it. Doesn't matter that we didn't previously had an articles collection. As soon as we insert the first document, collection gets created. So that's all we're going to do at the command prompt for now. We just want to make sure we've got an articles collection with those 3 documents. Anybody having any trouble getting these documents inserted? Should just be copy, paste, and execute. So now if you notice, when I go back to my data directory, now I have a COMP2068 PM database. Notice by default, right away it's 65 megs. Even a blank Mongo database is that size. So what I want to do now, I created a week 5 application today. We've already pushed this to Git, which is good. So what I'm going to do, we built some files last week that were working, right? We built a little header file and we had 3 files. I'm just going to open up last week's folder for a minute. Oh, I think they got wiped out on mine. That's okay, we can build them quickly. Okay. So we have index. So I'm going to open up the week 5 Express application I created at the start of class. If you haven't created an Express application for this week, you can either copy your folder from last week or you can quickly go to the command prompt and make a new week 5 Express application. So I've already got one. So I'm going to open up this application. I can get out of my Mongo command prompt. I want to keep this one running. I want to keep the server running, right? I don't want to delete, I don't want to stop my server, but we're not going to issue any more commands. So to stop my Mongo, to get out of here, if I just type exit, then I'll go back up one level and go into my week 5 application I created at the start of class. I want to start this application, so if I just type npm start, the one thing we didn't do yet was install npm. So I'm going to type npm install. And now I should be able to run the command npm start and launch our Express application locally. So I'll just go to localhost 3000. So here's our Express application. We already changed the title in index.js. So I'm going to open up my week 5 application. I'll close my work from this morning. Now, if you have your week 4, I managed to kind of mess up my week 4 folder. If you have yours from last week, you could copy in the partials, the header that we made. I'll just quickly make it again. So here's my application. So I'm just going to go into views and make a new directory called partials. And in here I'll make a new file called header.ejs. So what I'm going to do is go to my index page. We did this last week, but I'm just going to redo it, which is okay. I'm going to take everything from the body up out of this file and dump it in a header instead, so it's shared. So I'm just going to cut everything out of index, dump it in my header instead. We'll save that. I'm going to include my header. So if I rerun my application, it'll look exactly the same. All I've done is move a bit of the HTML. I'm going to put the Bootstrap links that we had back in a minute and create a really simple nav bar. So I'm just going to stop my application and restart it. I could install Node. I could put NodeMon in, which will save me the trouble. Maybe I should do that. So when I refresh same application, it's just split into the header and the index file. Now I want to use Bootstrap, so I'm going to go back to week 3, to my folder. that contains all of my Bootstrap links. I'm just going to copy those off a Blackboard, and I'm going to dump those in the head section of header.ejs. So I'll go back to my header. I'll take out the link to node style sheet. I'll put in the Bootstrap links. And I think to make my life easier, I'll go to package.json. And I'll change node to nodemon. When we deploy up to the cloud, we're going to want to change that back to node. But while I'm developing locally, nodemon saves time. So I'll stop my server. Start her up again. Nodemon's running. So we can see that we've got the change Bootstrap's been applied. I'm going to create a very simple nav bar with 2 links on it. So under my header, I'm going to create a nav. I'll use a couple of Bootstrap classes of navbar default. And I'll create a navigation bar with 2 links. So the first link just goes to the root, so just a slash. The second link is going to go to articles, which we will build. So this should give us a header that will be shared on every page that takes our header. There'll be an index link, there'll be an articles link. If I refresh, we get our header. Index works. What's going to happen when I click articles? Yeah, 404, because we haven't told our application, there is no articles page, and we haven't told it what to do at that URL, /articles. So we'll have to configure that. Everybody with me so far? Anybody lost? So the next thing we're going to need to do is we need to just set up a basic articles homepage. Going to be pretty simple. We won't put any dynamic content on it yet. So inside of views, normally what we do when we have a collection, so we have an articles collection, we're going to have a bunch of different views. We're going to have an index view that will show the list of articles. We'll have an add view that will have a blank form. We'll have an edit view that will be used with an edit form. So we could put all of the views right in our views folder here, but what's cleaner is to make subfolders. So I'm going to go into views, I'm going to make a new subfolder that I will call articles. And inside of articles, I'm going to make a new file called index.ejs. So this is the view that will load when the user clicks the articles link, right? The URL is localhost /articles. This is the page we want to show up. So we'll include the header. Now notice the path is different, right? Here's our main home page. We get to the header by just going partials and header. This page is in a subfolder, so what will we have to do in order to connect to the header in the path? Close. We got to do something before this path. We need to go up one directory, right? Because this page is in here. We have to go outside of articles and then into partials to get the header. So, whoops, I did it in the wrong page. This one's fine. So that's where we find the header. Up one level, out of the articles directory, and then into the partials directory. Yeah, the 2 dots say says go up.
Is it a period in between partials and header or a slash?
That's, sorry, yes, that should be a slash. My bad, thank you. So that's where we get the header from. We'll put on, for good HTML, Scott would be happy if I did this, we'll use a main tag. We'll use a Bootstrap class of container to indent it a little bit, and we'll put all the content on this page here. And we'll end the body and the HTML. We could also create a footer.ejs shared file. I'm not going to bother today. And we'll just put a bit of static content on here. We'll put a heading on that says articles. And we'll put on a link that we'll do next week that says add a new article. That's it. We won't actually put any dynamic content on here for today. We're just going to get it set up for dynamic content. We'll do it next week. So what we want now is when the user clicks that articles link to go to localhost/articles, we want this view to get sent. Right? So there's no just straight old, plain old HTML. So all of the views related to articles will go inside views, articles. If I go back to my browser, I can load my home page. Why am I still getting a 404? We now have a view. Why is this view not loading?
There's nothing in your rows.
Right. We still haven't told the application to map this URL to this view. Right? Let's look at what we did last week, what Express is. So here was the home page Express built. How does the application know when I click index to load that index.ejs file? Yep, so where's the controller? Where do we find it? So inside of routes, right? This was built by the generator. If the path is slash, meaning the root, render the index view and pass it this title. In fact, I can take those stars out now. They look silly. I'll take them out. So we now need an articles controller to handle any requests that are related to articles. So we're going to make a new JavaScript file, and we'll call it articles plural. Our controllers are always plural. I'm going to take that comment out. It's going to look very similar to what we have here. We'll link to Express. And we'll create a router object for routing. Those two lines are identical. So now we need to set up the routing. What happens if we get a request with the method get at the URL /articles? So now we'll set up our Express callback with request, response, and next. What should we do if we get a request at localhost /articles? What should the application do? Yep, we'll use response.render. Which view do we want to render? It's in the articles subfolder of views. And what's the name of the view? Right, it's articles index. And we'll have to pass it a title because our header is looking for a title variable. If we don't pass it, that line will crash. So we'll give it a title of articles. Now we need to make this public. Just like we did here. Same line of code. So now we have a controller that's looking for requests at localhost /articles. And if it finds it, we want to render this view. Let's try it again, see what happens. Index works. Okay. Well, I'll give you a hint. Everything we've done so far is correct. We're just not done yet. So we've set up our controller, we've set up our view, we've told the controller to interpret that URL and show that page. So why the heck do we get a 404? Where else do you think we need to look to do a bit of configuration? Right. So what do we need to do here to additionally configure it? Look at basically the top and bottom of the visible code. How do we configure our articles? So we're going to need app.use here, but we're also going to need to declare to reference our controller here, right? Express did these by default. When we created the generator, it automatically sets up connections to the index and users controllers and tells it this is the path where those controllers should be used. But now we've added a new controller called articles, so we need to add it. So we'll create an articles object that references our articles controller. So we'll need to add this on line 10. Then down below, we're going to need to run app.use that connects up that path. Anything in the /articles is handled by this controller. So enable the controller and then point that controller to a specific path. So now we need app.use articles. So it's a 3-step process. Create the controller, create the views, 4 steps. So we created our controller, we created our view, we map certain requests to different views, and then we have to configure our application to use the controller and then connect it up to a URL path. Ta-da! Just to show you how this works, let's say I change this path to /users. Now I should get a 404, but if I go to users, actually I shouldn't use users because that's already there. I've already mapped it. I'll comment that one out. That was the one Express gave us. Now if I go to /users, right, we've mapped that URL /users. We said any requests at /users use the articles controller. We don't really want to do it, but that's how it works. That's what this app.use does. It interprets a path and it tells Node, it tells Express which controller is going to handle requests in that section. So the easiest thing is just use the same name. Right? Whatever we call our controller name, that's the path we're going to use. If I go to anything else, what should I get? Right, we should get 404 because we haven't told the application what to do when a request comes in at that URL. So eventually, articles will load this page. We're going to want this page to load at that URL. So we're going to build an add view next week, an add EJS, and we're going to check if we get a GET request. We're actually going to need two. I'll show you what the code will look like by the time we're finished next week. What it actually will look like is this. We're actually going to have 6 different handlers in our articles.js. This is what the finished product will look like. Maybe. Kind of, sort of. So not only when we call get are we going to render our articles index, we're already doing this part, but we're going to want to query using Mongoose and MongoDB. We're going to want to query the database and get our list of articles and pass that list of articles so we can show them all on this page. We're going to have a get at articles/add that will show a blank form. Right? That's a get request, show the user the form. Then we're going to need to handle a post request. Well, what happens when the user hits submit and posts that form to the server? We're going to use MongoDB and Mongoose to save the article. Then we'll be able to do an edit at this URL. So article/some ID number. We're going to want to show the form and populate the article. Then we'll want to handle a post request. What happens if the user changes the title or content and submits the form? And then what happens if they run articles/delete/an ID? We'll want to delete it. So that's what our full controller will look like by the end of class next week. We'll be able to do all 4 Crud operations. So that's where we're going. And if we look at what the views will look like, under articles, we're going to need 3 views. Well, we wrote index, but we're going to add some code. And then we'll also have to write add and edit. So next week we'll have 3 views and we'll have those 6 handlers in our controller. Okay, everybody with me so far? So now we're just going to do 2 more quick things and then we're going to pause for today. We want to get our application to be able to connect to our MongoDB. Okay, we won't do CRUD operations today. We just want to configure it and connect, and we'll stop here. So I'm going to stop my application for a minute. So how does Node and Express, how do they actually talk to MongoDB? We use a package called Mongoose. Okay, we looked this morning on NPM. In the last month alone, there were 600,000 downloads of Mongoose from NPM. Okay, so it's a really popular package. So it basically does all this stuff. It handles data typing. It lets us put in validation rules. So let's say we have a field in our database that's required or only allows certain values. We can use Mongoose to set up those rules in our Node application. It can handle business logic, queries, and connecting is something. Here's a simple example. So we're going to need to install the package in a minute. We'll have to add it into our app.js. Here's our connection line. Much easier than a PHP connection line. Mongoose.connect. What type of database? MongoDB. What's the host? What's the name of the database? That's it. Now we're connected. So we'll stop our server and let's run an npm install with Mongoose. So now if I go to my week 5 node modules, Mongoose has been added. So the command's just npm space install space Mongoose. So pretty much all our applications moving forward, we're always going to be using the database, so we're going to want Mongoose in all of them. So now we'll want to link to it in our app.js. So we'll add Mongoose, create a variable called Mongoose, and we'll link to the Mongoose package. So now, after our application starts, so we'll connect to MongoDB with Mongoose. So all we need to say is mongoose.connect. And then our connection string, MongoDB is the driver. We can connect to other types. We can even connect to relational databases if we want to. Our server is localhost and the name of your database. So for me, it's COMP2068 PM. So if you created a new database, just use that name. If you're just using the test database, then it's just localhost/test. And now we'll check the connection. So I'm going to check our connection. And if we have an error when we connect, we'll just output a message to the console. So we can bind it this way. So if somehow that database we can't connect, it'll print a message as soon as our application starts. Or if that doesn't happen, we can just call once, meaning do this only once. When the connection is opened, we'll print a confirmation to the console. We'll just say connected to MongoDB. And I'll finish that with a semicolon. So if we restart our application now, we should get one of two things being printed to the console. Once the app restarts, it's going to try and connect to Mongoose on line 18. If it fails, it'll print the error message. If it connects, one time it'll print that message to the console. So we'll know whether we're connected or whether we're not. I'll try it first. I'll misspell the name of my server. So we should see an error. So I'm going to save that. I'll start my app again. And we get a connection error. Address not found, right? Local hosts without the T. Okay, that's fine. So it gives us both the name and the error, which is good. If I go in and make that change, I've got NodeMon running, save my change. It restarts, and now we get connected to MongoDB. So connecting in Express with Mongoose is not like PHP where we're constantly connecting and disconnecting. Okay? It doesn't use the same kind of resources, so we're okay to just connect when our application starts. Okay? Now, I've put this connection in app.js. Later on, we might move it into a separate configuration file. We might encrypt it. We'll keep it simple for today and just keep it here. Okay. Next week, if we connect to MongoLab, our connection's exactly the same, except instead of localhost, we'll have a server address from MongoLab. We'll also have to supply credentials, a username and password in the connection string. When we are running it locally, we don't have any authentication, so we don't need to put in a username and password. So now we're connected, and our application continues to run normally. So we just have to do one more piece, 5 minutes, and then we're done for today. In order for us to be able to do the create, read, update, and delete that you see here, we're missing one piece of our application. We have the controller that does all the routing. We have our view. What piece are we missing though? We talked about MVC and we said Node and Express and the mean stack is an MVC framework. What does MVC stand for, if anybody remembers? Well, we've got the control. So this is our controller. We're looking at it. Yeah, it's model view controller. We've got our view. Sorry, here's our view. We've got our controller that can load the view, but they're not talking to the database. So the piece we're missing that sits in between is the model. We need to create an article model that tells our Express application what the article collection looks like in the database. So we're going to create a folder. I'm going to right click on my project at the top. I'm going to create a directory called models. And in here I'm going to create a new JavaScript file called article. All lowercase and singular. So our controller names are plural and the convention is the model names are singular. So the model is basically like a class, right? Where we have to now define for our application what is an article, what does it look like. So we'll create this model file. I'll show you what one looks like, and then next week we'll start to work with it. Because the nice thing is when we build a model, and we call it a Mongoose model, it automatically has create, read, update, and delete built into it. We don't have to write those methods. As long as we say this is a Mongoose model, it can do those things for us. So the first thing we need is Mongoose. So this is article.js saved in my models folder. So now we want to define the object schema. So I'm going to create a variable called article schema, which is a new Mongoose schema. So now we can set out what an article looks like. And because we've said it's a Mongoose schema, it will have automatically inherit the Mongoose Crud Operations. So we want 3 columns, 3 fields. We want a created field, which is of type date, and we can set a default. So rather than setting a default in the database, we can set all the rules in the model. So when we create a new article, if we don't pass in a date, it just takes the current date and time as the default value. We want to have a title field. What type's that going to be? Article title. What data type? Yeah, probably a string. We can give it a default of an empty string. We also have this neat property, trim. What will happen if I set that to true? What will that do? Yeah, so if I save an article title and there's spaces at the beginning or the end, automatically when I save it, the model will trim those spaces off the ends. I can also set up that it's required with the message. So if the user tries to save a title, an article with no title, the model will do the validation for me. We'll still validate it on the front end, but this is also a check on the back end. And then we want a content field, which is also string. We'll default it to empty, and we'll trim this as well. We won't make it the content required, because it could be we're going to create an article, put in a title and a date, and we'll write the content later. The last thing we need to do is make this public so the controller can see it. So we're also going to export this as a Mongoose model. So we're going to call our model article. So article with a capital A is how we can reference this class from our controller. And it's using our article schema. So this just makes it public. It inherits the properties of a Mongoose model. So now in our controller, if we look at where we're going next week, if you notice the methods, we link to our model. When we want to find all the articles, we just call find. We don't have to write that method. It's built into Mongoose. When we want to create a new record, we call create. We can find by ID. All these methods are built into Mongoose. Update and remove. So we've created our object. Because our object uses a Mongoose schema and is a Mongoose model, it inherits all those methods. Mongoose also has one other cool method called upsert. What do you suppose that might do? You're close. What upsert does is it tries to do an update on an existing record, but if that record isn't found in the database, what do you suppose it will do instead? You got it. It will insert it. Rather than us having to check, is this record new or not, upsert will do that logic for us. If we find a match, we'll update it. If not, we'll just add it new. So now we have a model, we have views, and we have a controller. So we're starting to set up our full MVC framework. So we're going to stop here for today. We've basically have our application fully set up to run our create, read, update, and delete operations. So next week, what we're going to do at the start of class, we're going to pick up right from here. I'll make a new repository. Basically, I'll make a week 6 folder. I'll copy in my models, my roots, my views, and my app.js. So we're starting right from where we are today. And the very first thing we're going to do is when we render our articles page, we want that list of articles that we inserted. We want these three articles that we inserted to show up in a loop. So in our controller, we need to call the find method to get those articles, and we need to pass that list of articles to our index view, and then write the HTML in our EJS file to display those in a loop. Okay? Then we'll build a form so we could add new articles, and we'll save them. And it'll repopulate our index view, and then we'll do edit and delete. We should be able to do it all next week. Then before your midterm, we have a full CRUD solution using MVC and Mongo. And then the last piece after reading week is Tom will show you guys how to add Angular into it, as well as he's going to do authentication first, and then using Angular for dynamic front end second. Okay? Any questions? I will put